Coming to you from the dining room table at East Barbary Lane, welcome to a special episode of Full Circle, the podcast.
I am your host, Charles Tyson Jr.
And I'm your host, Martha Madrigal. Our special guest today is the author of 7 books, including Glass and The Pleasures of Memory and Shakespeare Sonnets. In 2021, he was named a Guggenheim Fellow. Today we're discussing the book Red, Hot, and Blue from the 33 1/3 series. John S. Garrison, welcome to the Full Circle table.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
We're so glad to have you. So you have written this awesome book about Red, Hot, and Blue. And, you know, the Red, Hot, and Blue project was in 1990. So I was in the 10th grade.
Shut up.
But as a high schooler, you know, in the 90s, who was not yet out to himself, not to mention anyone else, and then a project like this coming out, it gave me a lot of feelings. But why don't you talk about what the project is and your introduction to it and what it meant in your life at that time?
Yeah. It's interesting. I was sort of in the same place. I was, 1990, just graduating high school, entering college. And I
am so old in this room.
I'm feeling it too. But I was also like not out to anybody, kind of out to myself, but not, no one talked about queerness or being gay or whatever, and certainly not in the way they do now. So yeah, for that album to come out and all of a sudden have, U2, Thompson Twins, David Byrne, all these people singing about, in some cases, queer love, Katie Lang, in some cases singing about the epidemic. Just all of a sudden I thought like, whoa, like if they all talk about gay things and about HIV, then maybe it shouldn't be so scary for me to do it. But the album itself came out as the first major response from the music industry to the AIDS epidemic. There hadn't really been anything as big beforehand. There have been a couple small things. And it came out at the time of the sort of height of the pandemic. This is before the triple cocktail, before effective treatments. It was around the time that AIDS was the number one killer of Americans 25 to 44. So it was really kind of the pinnacle of the epidemic, the kind of a crux time for me in terms of my own coming out. And it was time for action, and the music industry stepped up.
For real. Definitely. And it was, a lot of the heavy hitters in the industry. And it was pretty brave of them. Well, it was considered, let me say that, it was considered pretty brave of them all to attach themselves to this project, because Lord knows the stigma towards the disease was still very heavy at the time.
Well, and the stigma toward queerness was very heavy at the time, right?
Right, yeah.
I came of age a little bit younger and, in the early 80s. So, I was there when we were just starting to talk about it and figure out what did it mean and how did we contract it. And, just in this moment in time in America, I had a discussion with a whole bunch of trans people last night, and we were talking about the pandemic that, ours lasted 15 years.
Yes.
And this really was the center of it. So, yeah, the stigma was around us existing. The stigma was around us, daring to defy anyone and realizing that we had to be loud. We didn't really have a choice. So the project itself, talk a little bit about that, surrounds Cole Porter's music. And ironically, there's not really a mention of his queerness.
In the project.
The project.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's super interesting. So the Red Hot organization would go on to make a whole series of albums supporting funding to combat the AIDS epidemic, and then later funding efforts towards same-sex marriage in Southeast Asia. And now they have a new album where is supporting trans rights with trans performers doing duets with cisgendered performers. But this was their first album, and it really came about because there was someone in the arts community named John Carlin, who was friends with Keith Haring, David One Aerobics, some really high-profile queer artists who were dying or died of HIV. And he partnered with David Byrne of the Talking Heads, whose sister-in-law was HIV positive, and she would actually die shortly after the album came out. And they got together with a filmmaker named Lee Blake, and the three of them just went out to musical artists and said, we need to do something, and we need to raise awareness. We need to get some funding out there to fight the AIDS epidemic. And they brought a bunch of artists together to do covers of Cole Porter songs. And you're exactly right. It's a kind of a curious choice because Cole Porter, lived and died before the AIDS epidemic, lived and died before Stonewall, was a semi-closeted gay man, and nonetheless, they chose to resurrect his music for the album. And you're exactly right. They didn't overtly talk about Cole Porter being queer. One of the requirements from the Cole Porter Family Foundation, I guess, the folks who own the rights, was that they wouldn't mention his queerness. But I think it comes out nonetheless when you listen to the songs in this context, and you realize that he's talking about loss, forbidden love, secret love, the kinds of things that we're all very familiar with as queer people.
And what's very cool about that is, when I'm 15 years old, I don't think I really clocked that the project was centering around Cole Porter's music. And then later on in life, I saw the movie DeLovely.
Yeah.
And that's when I realized he wasn't being really that subtle in even though he was being very subtle with his lyrics. And so once when I'm reading the book and I'm putting all the pieces together, I'm realizing how perfect of a choice that actually was. Euphemism upon euphemism upon euphemism. And it also gave a lot of room for the interpretation when it came to the videos. Before we sat down, I sat and I watched them all. I found a good deal of them, not all of them, but many of them on YouTube.
Yeah.
And they were such works of art. The one that stuck out to me, well, the two that stuck out to me the most, one was Nana Cherry, Got You Under My Skin. For one thing, that was the only one from that project that made its way to me on its own, just by virtue of it being something that Nana Cherry did. So, of course, I wanted to know what it was. And the other one was Too Darn Hot, which was Erasure, I believe. Yeah, and that was such an artistic piece. Yeah, there was so many ways to express the feelings of Cole Porter's music and what was just going on in the time. Talk a little bit about the pushback in terms of what could be said, what couldn't be said, and how.
Yeah, it's funny, kind of same as you. When I first heard the songs, I think I didn't even register them as Cole Porter songs. Like I thought, oh, this is like a cool new song by U2. I mean, it shows how naive a lot of us are, or at least I was, as kind of a young queer person about our past. Like we don't realize that the queer people, trans people, non-binary people, like have been around forever. And it's so powerful, or it was for me at least, just realizing Cole Porter and all these people in the past who lived queer lives, contributed so much to what we think of now as just kind of straight society in a way. Like Cole Porter authored so many of the love songs that have been canonized or thought of today as like these great kind of, I don't know, wedding songs or whatever. But we realized that, it's like queer people have always been there in this long history. But yeah, you see this in the Lovely film, and that there was pushback against Cole Porter's open sexuality at the time. When the album came out, Nina Cherry's song is one of the standouts. I've Got You Under My Skin. She uses that song, alters some of the lyrics to have it speak directly to the dangers of injection drug use for HIV transmission and the need to not share needles. It was seen as totally radical to sort of redo the song. Even though as you hear the title, I've Got You Under My Skin, you realize, oh my God, it's the perfect metaphor, I guess, for virus transmission, for thinking about just like, why not to share needles? Like, it's really basic. Don't get someone else under your skin. But the song was controversial for a couple reasons. One, because this is the early days of rap. So a lot of the reviewers said, oh, the album's really great when it stays true to Cole Porter's music. But when they try to do a rap song with Cole Porter's music, like, it doesn't work because rap isn't even music. So it was kind of this early period where there was all this prejudice against rap, which of course is totally wrapped up in prejudice against folks of color. But that song was so radical that when the television special for Red Hot and Blue aired in the US, which had the videos and the songs, they left out the Nina Cherry video because it was just, like I said, they didn't want people speaking so frankly about how AIDS is transmitted, even though the way to stop AIDS from being transmitted is to speak really frankly about how you get it, how you don't get it.
Right. And that would explain why I came across that video separate from the project. Got it. Okay.
Totally. It's like, please, my dog may make weird noises at times, so just please ignore that.
That's okay.
Ours is going to at any moment too. It's fine.
Probably, yeah. I get a kick out of You, also, the Jungle Brothers.
Oh, yeah.
They did a lot of work with the lyrics.
Yeah, that was the only other song where they changed the lyrics besides the Ninja Cherry. And that song's really interesting because they changed it to be overtly about kind of sexuality and how sort of hooking up without using a condom is dangerous. But it's a really interesting song because that one also had pushback where folks didn't want to play it, didn't want to showcase it because they spoke so overtly about sex. But Cole Porter's original was about cocaine. So
right,
yeah. So the kick in the song was about doing cocaine, and that was censored at the time. It wasn't at Cole Porter's time. It wasn't played on the radio. It went on to become one of his biggest hits, but he had to change the lyrics. So it's funny that, like, in the modern day or whatever, like, people think, oh, that song's too controversial by the Jungle Brothers, we can't play it. But it's like, that song's always been controversial. It's not a new thing.
Right. And it's interesting seeing that video for the first time today. It totally fits into where hip hop went shortly after, because so many artists made a point, if not doing an entire song, at least having a message about using a condom and practicing safe sex. So that might have been, like, opening the door for that, or it just happened.
Yeah, 100%. The hip hop community, rap community, we're one of the most affected communities in terms of HIV, where access to healthcare and access to different kinds of messaging wasn't getting to folks of color as readily.
Right.
And, thinking back even before Red Hot and Blue, one of the early pioneers in terms of AIDS messaging was TLC.
Right, with the condoms on the glasses.
Whose song "Let's Talk About Sex" was a song overtly about just having honest dialogue about sex and sexuality.
Oh, Salt and Pepper.
Oh, sorry, that's Salt and Pepper. Sorry, yeah. Right. I was petting the dog, trying to keep him from barking at the same time, losing my history.
Multitasking.
But sorry, TLC. But TLC also was really invested in early AIDS messaging. They would wear condoms on their clothes in their videos and in public to emphasize safe sex.
Yeah, I remember they got in trouble because they all looked like they were like teenagers and they're wearing condoms on their faces and on their clothes. Yeah,
Yeah, it was awesome. Yeah.
It really was. Yeah, this project definitely, seeing it now with my today eyes, really was the opening the door for that style of activism in music, which became much more prevalent in the next 2 years, I would say. And this project started was the Red Foundation first, and then it became this, or this started the Red Foundation?
This started, so yeah, the Red Foundation, Bono's major global organization fighting against HIV, that came out of this project. So for Bono, for Annie Lennox of the Eurythmics, it was really this album, Red Hot and Blue, that was their start of being global leaders in the fight against HIV.
Nice.
So it's pretty, I mean, it's really interesting to me how being invited to be part of a project like this is often the kind of first step. Once you invite someone in, they can all of a sudden become one of the really major pioneers and major leaders for a issue they just might not have known that much about before.
Right. So you mentioned Bono the most, U2 the most. Is it safe to say that that is your favorite entry in the project?
I definitely, yeah. So their song was Night and Day, which is in some ways one of Cole Porter's most famous songs. And it's the song that's been the most re-recorded, the most adapted of all his songs. I think so. I love that song. I mean, that song's about sort of obsession, desire, thinking about someone night and day. Like that for me, I don't know. Maybe it's all of our experiences of teenage love, but that really speaks to how I felt when I was a teenager in my early 20s. Just like love and passion was just such a big part, I think, of coming out, being young, getting into music. So that song for me really speaks to kind of what it's about, to have feelings and on the one hand want to resist them, and on the other hand want to talk to everybody about them.
That part. And yeah, definitely, because you were a couple of years older than me, so you were in that space, which I didn't get to until I didn't come out until 93, 94. And by that point, we were even further along into the saga that was the epidemic. And I never really went back to Red Hot and Blue. And it's a shame, because looking at it now, I'd have been all over it.
Yeah, totally.
Just like the imagery in like the Erasure video, just speaks to me. Like the family, the little white nuclear family,
Totally.
sitting in front of the television with the red blindfolds on. Just so powerful. So the project aired, was it in the UK first?
Yeah. The project was sort of multifold. So there was the album that had the 20 covers of Cole Porter songs. There were videos made by really leading filmmakers, Jonathan Demme, Wim Wenders. And those videos were then put together into a television special, which was meant to raise awareness about HIV. It aired first in the UK with very little concern about showing all the videos, speaking frankly about sex. And then it also aired later in the US. In the US, it was sort of dialed back. In the UK, it was very much an AIDS awareness special that sort of had Cole Porter as a through line. In the US, it was a Cole Porter special that also mentioned the AIDS epidemic. But it still was groundbreaking.
What a distinction.
Yeah,
Sorry.
well, exactly. I mean, and such, I mean, it's weird. It's a distinction that speaks so much to, I think, all of our experiences as queer people, as trans people, as gay people, where like we're so familiar with that trend where our lives are mentioned briefly. We're a side character in popular media. We're a character who dies off. We're the uncle, aunt, whoever who like you never hear about, who doesn't come to Thanksgiving.
Right.
A cautionary tale.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no one talks about Edna anymore, or whatever.
Right.
So yeah, so the special kind of did that same kind of work where it kind of in the U.S. it mentioned us, but also sort of tried to downplay us, but still it was radical. It was the first time that the word condom was ever used on primetime television outside of the news in the U.S. Richard Gere was the host, so definitely a big name who sort of raised awareness about frankness, talking about sexuality. John Malkovich was also a host. So on the one hand, at prime time, you had actors you recognized talking about things like AIDS, sexually transmitted disease. On the other hand, it was the U.S. one was a much more vanilla version of what was broadcast globally.
Which makes sense considering A, the U.S. and B, that time.
Totally.
And it's interesting because you think it would be, for lack of a better word, more palatable coming from these beloved celebrities.
Yeah.
But apparently not so much. What were other parts of that project that stuck with you?
There was also, well, I should say also like part and parcel of the Red Hot and Blue project was a public awareness campaign that had posters and wheat pasting and whatnot about HIV prevention. And that campaign was radical too. One, because it showed unclothed, naked, straight couples, gay, queer couples, but also it showed mixed race couples. It was bilingual. It was this kind of early moment in the pandemic where a lot of the prevention messaging was just about white men. Right. Because it was perceived as a gay male disease. Part of this project for me was going back to all the stuff I'd kind of forgotten. I had forgotten that when HIV first emerged, it was referred to, by the White House as a gay plague.
Right. Yeah.
And even in medical circles, it was called gay related immunodeficiency syndrome, GRID.
GRID came before
GRID. So, I mean, and if you listen to that name, gay related, it sounds like, because you're gay or related to the gay quote unquote lifestyle, you get this disease. Like gay itself is sort of a disease or attracts disease. Gay is a sickness.
Right.
And there was,
of course. Well, and it was, you mentioned it in the book. It took until 1973 for it to, be removed from the DSM.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it took, and there's this lag time. So you think just because it is taken out of the DSM in the 70s doesn't mean that all the way through when I was growing up or even today, people don't think, isn't it sort of something you catch? Can't people be recruited? Like all those ideas are still there. So, writing this book really took me back to that era. I don't know if I blocked it out or if things are better now. So I've forgotten how bad they used to be, but it was hard to go back to thinking about what it was like in the late 80s, early 90s, but it was also good for me to remember that, all that stuff was so readily available, all that kind of prejudice, all that homophobia, all that transphobia, all that racism, it just immediately bubbled to the surface with the pandemic.
Yes, it did. Because we had the 70s, right? So we had Stonewall and other uprisings in the 1960s that kind of led us to a brief era. It lasted about as long as disco.
Yeah.
When we were there. Yeah. Kind of celebrated and part of the culture and the village people and
totally.
all of that. And then here was AIDS, 1981. And a lot of people believed that was our comeuppance.
Yeah.
Like, see, that's what you get from that kind of behavior. Celebrating all that faggotry.
Right.
And that really was the way it looked, and so for all the strides we made, we took a huge step back for most of the 80s and the 90s. It changed the conversation.
Yeah, it's so tragic. I think on the one hand, people forget that actually before AIDS, there was so much progress around queer rights, around queer people being accepted. The AIDS epidemic,
right? Come out wherever you
exactly.
Are.
The AIDS epidemic, I mean, of course, took a huge toll on queer people in terms of their health. But yeah, it allowed all this, like Jesse Helms, all these sort of figures, Westboro Church, all these figures and organizations and laws to all of a sudden surface because they could take advantage of all people's fears that, oh, gay people are spreading diseases, gay people are doing all these sort of horrible things. People just seized on that. And then all of a sudden we had this huge backslide.
How important to you, how important do you think queer history is right now? Learning it, going back over it, realizing where we came from, to get to this point in time?
For me, it's super important. And, it's funny. It hasn't always been. Like at one point I thought, I don't know, that like our lives were so radically different than queer people who came before us, that they couldn't have ever seen what we'd be like, that we need to kind of recreate ourselves in the present.
Right.
But now, as things get sort of more chaotic, more precarious, I really take solace in the idea that queer people have come before us, queer people have survived, queer people have thrived.
Yes.
But it's also important to let people know that, queer people have been under duress for a very, very, very long time. Yes, things are better, maybe getting worse, but let's not sort of dismiss queer suffering by saying, oh, like everything's good now. Like you all have.
Oh no.
I don't know what we
have. This generation is kind of seeing that, things can be precarious.
Totally.
They were then. They were, before then. Nobody was out in the 50s and 60s. No, very few people, unless you couldn't pass as anything but who you were.
Right.
You hid because that was the only way to have a job and a life and a place to live. With, I want to say, little exception, and just as I've contemplated, we're sitting down just a few days after the 2024 election.
Yeah.
As I've sat with young queer and trans people who are hurting right now, that was the message that came to my mind is I need you to know we are resilient people, that you stand on the shoulders of giants. We are not new to controversy.
Yeah.
Our people were tempered in raw shit. And I feel like reaching back and understanding that this is not even the first time we've been targeted.
Yeah.
It's not even the third time.
Right. That part.
And we emerge and we continue, and we still bring you all of your color, art, and culture. And that's not going to change. I feel like that's the message, and looking back at this, I was like, yeah, it helped me to remember those times and what that was like, and totally different world. And a lot of us felt like we had to apologize, until we kind of saw ACT UP, and we saw like, we better get loud or die.
Right.
And
yeah, totally. I mean, that all was so inspiring for me. I remember, God, when I was, I don't know, 17 or whatever, and I saw on TV my first Kiss In. Because I remember, like, folks would get, like, big crowds of people would get together and they'd like make out in front of, I don't know, City Hall or like conservative politicians. I can remember my first instinct being, oh, don't do that. That'll make people feel uncomfortable. Like that's what people don't want to see, that. Like that's going to make them think that gay people because I'd internalized all those messages of gay people should stay in the closet, keep it behind closed doors. I don't want to hear about what you do in bed. I don't want to see just, we don't need public displays of affection. And now I think things like kiss-ins or something are so powerful because it is saying, there's nothing wrong with me holding hands with or kissing or whatever a same-sex partner. Like, this is totally natural. But as young people, I think we internalize all that kind of shame, all that desire to keep ourselves invisible. And it just does so much damage to young people.
It absolutely does. It's just, conversely, having not experienced any of that, a lot of them are just really feeling mowed over right now.
Yeah.
Like, why would they do this to us?
Yeah.
Why? And it's like, yeah, they've always done this to us in one way or another. I find it interesting. This is another conversation that has come up is, that the fight for marriage equality, in large part, the message was assimilation. We're just like you. Which doesn't really leave a lot of room, does it, for actual queer love, for actual queer stories, right? It's no. Well, we're safe. It's okay. We want to pick a fence too. And some of us don't.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that we're just like you argument. I don't know. It denies the truth of love, like what love is. I think, I don't know. Or in Cole Porter's music, what love is like one of Cole Porter's most famous songs is "Anything Goes."
I know. I'm right on that page.
Okay,
I'm right on that page as you say it. Yeah.
And I think that's the truth of love, is that everyone loves differently. Everyone wants different things. People change their mind throughout their life. People express themselves differently. So yeah, same-sex marriage, well, it was a win. I think somewhat to the argument was gay people are just like straight people, therefore we deserve equal rights. Okay. In some ways that's true, but it ended up blocking out what love is, which is wild, uncontrollable, passionate, undefinable, changeable. And Cole Porter, like a lot of Cole Porter's music is about that love is fun. Love makes us do crazy things. Love is, Charles, as you were saying, love is too darn hot. It takes us into this place of like excess, extremity, passion, wanting more, getting outside of ourselves. That's what's so exciting about love. And that's what was so scary about the AIDS epidemic was, at least for me, like, I'm coming out. I want to experience falling in love. I want to, I don't know, kiss people, whatever. And all of a sudden there's this virus out there and it makes it extremely dangerous to make love to anybody. It makes it extremely dangerous to fall in love, especially as a queer person. It makes it extremely dangerous to be a queer person because with AIDS, there was violence against queer people. And it was so hard to make sense of that at 17, 18, 20, where I thought, wait, no, love is like cool and positive and fun and amazing. And all of a sudden it's like, no. It comes with all these disclaimers now.
Right. And it did. A lot changed over a very short period of time from, those brief moments in the late 70s to, a really stark contrast in the early 80s. I love that you just weave in pop culture and history throughout the book. You mentioned Paris is Burning.
Oh yeah. Love it.
And then they're on the same page. You talk about O'Shea Sibley.
Yeah.
Much more recent.
Yeah. Yeah. I tried to, part of what the book was for me was really just sort of thinking about like both what music does for us or for me in terms of thinking about what love can be and what it should be, but also like just thinking about how I learned about love and how I learned about kind of who I am and how to be proud of who I am. So because of that, one of the early reviews of the book described it as a mixtape. And I think that is very much what I tried to get at, was that what kind of makes us us is a whole kind of collection of songs we've loved, movies we've seen, comments people have said to us, people we've dated. It's the whole assemblage of who we are is all the kind of stuff we've collected, the people, the memories, the song lyrics, the things we've decided are our favorite things. Way back to Julie Andrews, The Sound of Music. The things we list as our favorite things, like actually tell other people who we are and tell us who we are, because we look and we say, I love this song, I love this movie, I love Shakespeare, I used to love to, go hiking, and this one, whatever it is, like this list of who we are is a kind of a love letter to ourselves in terms of who we want to be.
Yeah.
I love that.
Just in the last words in the book, you talk about, music is the ideal vehicle, not just to move people, but to energize a movement. Red Hot and Blue standing as its inspiring foundation. I think music continually, especially times like now, when words are just failing and meaning less and less, and there's such a cacophony of misinformation in the air, music still does speak to everyone.
Yeah, amazingly so. I mean, I think when you say that, I think of not even necessarily queer rights movement or the AIDS fight against AIDS, but even back to songs against the Vietnam War and songs for peace that came out in the 60s. Right. These sort of songs allowed people to kind of express what they were feeling, what they wanted to have happen. I don't know, Marvin Gaye, What's Going On, John Lennon, Imagine. These songs that kind of move us because we think that's what peace feels like. That's the world I want to live in. And it moves us to imagine a more peaceful world, and it can make us want to, as I say in the book, join a movement towards peace. And two, also, I don't know, when you said that, and I love the way you put it, I was also thinking about how certain songs will come on in a queer context, like We Are Family.
You're right.
Even though that song isn't necessarily about queer people or necessarily about the queer lives we live now, the minute a room full of queer people hear We Are Family or I'm Coming Out,
I'm coming out, yeah.
Or YMCA, it sparks a kind of a queer joy, because we feel like, well, we may not be loved, or maybe we are, by our family of origin, but we all found family with each other. And it was, for all the hardship and all the sadness, it was just an exhilarating feeling for so many of us to find queer community, queer family, to find people like us who might actually not look or act like us at all, but like they have a certain feeling we have, and all that's so powerful.
Yeah. I one of the most important things and themes, I think, of the next 4 years is going to be community.
Yeah, 100%.
That chosen family. I had a friend say, I spent my birthday with everyone that I love. I had my biological family on Saturday and my logical family on Sunday.
Oh, that's great.
I had never heard that before.
I've never heard that before. It's terrific.
My logical family.
Consider it stolen.
Exactly. I will be using that today.
I talk often about the need for shorthand, right? Yeah. Queer people, trans people, we need queer and trans friends. We need people for whom we don't have to explain ourselves. I don't have to educate you in order to have a conversation with you, right? Because we can meet and understand who we are and where we are. And, it's so important. Books like this are so important. It's a lovely, fast read that's packed with so much. And you're telling a story, but again, weaving so much history into the way you tell it. I love it.
And what I also appreciate is in reading it and then going into the footnotes and then going and doing a deep dive there, I had this total deep dive in queer history that was in that time period that was such a sweet spot for me. And so it was things that I was aware of as a young queer person, but didn't necessarily follow. Like you mentioned the documentary Tongues Untied, which talks about the epidemic from the Black gay male perspective, which was, largely overlooked, even though, like we said before, that was one of the hardest hit demographics of the community. And the press conference, the White House press conference, where we're trying to get a statement from the White House using the word AIDS and being met with laughter. Those moments, that's
6 years.
Yeah.
6 years.
Yeah.
We waited for him to say it.
Yep.
Yeah, and it was on the day Rock Hudson died that Reagan finally talked about AIDS. I don't know, but yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that, because I wanted to write a short book, because all of our attention spans are shorter, but also because I wanted to sort of capture a feeling, but I also, exactly as you say, I wanted to point people in different directions. So if you want to learn about the sort of long history of Reagan's White House press conferences around AIDS, the book takes you to a place where you can actually listen to the actual briefings and read the transcript. You can go and watch Marlon Riggs's film to hear an articulation of Black frustration around the AIDS epidemic. You can go and watch the videos as you did, and that might spark another exploration. Okay, when did Katie Lang come out, and how did her video read to queer people, even though she wasn't publicly out, but her video was showing herself as a woman whose female lover had died. So the book, I hope, kind of opens up all these avenues. And in fact, I've spoken to lots of young people who have read the book and said, I was so grateful to read it because, I knew the AIDS epidemic existed, obviously, but I just had no sense. I couldn't make sense of it. And I think it's one thing to read a long history book, which you can, about the AIDS epidemic, and that's great. But I wanted to capture what it felt like to be living through it. And I think for a lot of readers, I've been happy to hear that listening to really transmit it. They feel like, I now understand what older queer people and other folks who lived through it, what it felt like for them to live through that.
Yeah, you definitely did capture it. It took me back to that time, and what we're trying to be, what we're afraid to say we are. It's really powerful. This is a really good book, and it's going to have a special place on our bookshelves.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Well, thank you for having me on to talk about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that I am always reminded of, we talk about the timeline, and 96 is such a pivotal year, right? When the cocktail came out. What we don't talk so much about is how long it took that to filter down to the street level, and impact the lives of folks who didn't have insurance, the lives of folks who didn't have the money to pay for it. And that took several more years.
Yeah, that took a while. And the other thing I remembered, which I kind of forgotten about reading this book, there were people for whom the cocktail came soon enough, Magic Johnson being a famous example, and they got the cocktail, they're living with a chronic disease, but they ended up living a full life. And there were people who were alive when the cocktail arrived, but they were so advanced with HIV disease, it couldn't help them. So there was the insurance piece, there was the access to information, there was knowing if you were infected. There's the whole other part of this, which is that folks in the developing world couldn't get access to it. So on the one hand, it was about privilege. On the other hand, I feel like there was a tragic roll of the dice, because I can remember friends who were HIV positive. The cocktail came out. This is so great. But it just wasn't, even within months, kind of, it just wasn't in time to save them. And it was so heartbreaking.
Yeah. Well, and, one of the things we don't realize in 2024 is there are still people who die of AIDS.
Yeah.
Because by the time they're diagnosed correctly, it happens. It still happens that it's too late. That's why, knowing your status. We volunteer with the AIDS Fund we have for years. We stage managed the Philadelphia AIDS Walk.
Cool.
And, watch the quilt displayed, and we talk about the stigma that still exists. There are so many stories still happening. There was so much resistance to PrEP initially from the large AIDS organizations.
Yeah.
And it was like, what? come on. And yeah, it's still happening. And we still need awareness. We still need to care for one another. We still need to keep removing stigma, and saying it's so important to know.
Yeah, I'm so glad I had forgotten that. There's so much stuff I forget, which is why I think it's so great to talk with queer people about queer lives. Yeah, when PrEP came out, there was a lot of shame around PrEP.
Yes.
People felt like, oh, if I say I'm on PrEP, then I'm sort of announcing to the world that I, whatever, I have sexual desire.
I'm a whore.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm a whore.
Yeah. I can't control myself sexually, or I can't control myself in terms of having safer sex. And, looking back on, like, now it's just sort of normal to hear that someone's on PrEP, but like, for all the work we do to instill pride in queer people and to talk openly about sex, we can still just do it to ourselves and all of a sudden be so ashamed to talk about the fact that I am a human being who wants to experience love and sex and a fully realized life. Like, for some reason, claiming that can make us still feel so embarrassed sometimes. Not all of us, but it can make people react that way.
That shame campaign was effective.
Yeah, totally.
It certainly was.
Totally.
Yeah, another one to the bookshelf.
Okay, good.
I love that you have chronicled this story so well and so beautifully.
Thank you.
And the book is part of the 33 and a third series, Red Hot and Blue. John S. Garrison, it's been amazing talking with you.
I love talking to both of you also. I love this kind of connection. It warms my heart.
Ours too.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining
Thank you. Take care.
Take care.
You too.
Full Circle is a Never Scared Productions podcast, hosted by Charles Tyson Jr. and Martha Madrigal, produced and edited by Never Scared, executive produced by Charles Tyson Jr. and Martha Madrigal. Our theme and music is by the Jingleberries. All names, pictures, music, audio, and video clips are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of their respective copyright holders.